So welcome everyone. I'd like to get underway. On behalf of Randwick, Waverley and Woollahra councils, I'd like to welcome you to our electric vehicle and charging stations webinar. My name is Michelle Rose. I'm the Environmental Education Officer with Woollahra Council, and we've got some other council officers on board today for the session as well from Waverley and Randwick. Our councils are on the lands of the Gadigal, Bidjigal and Birrabirragal people, the traditional custodians of the land. We'd like to pay our respects to all the elders past, present and emerging. Today we'll have with us two main presenters. One is Anthony Weinberg, who works across our three council areas on some of our sustainability programs, and he has helped to develop and support the rollout of some really important programs that have made a significant difference across our area. And you might have heard of a few of these. One of them is Compost Revolution, where we've supported our community members to get compost bins and worm farms, Solar My School, Solar My Club program, and also the rollout of the EV charging stations across our council areas. So Anthony's got lots of understanding of what it is involved in getting EV charging happening in our areas, and linked in with that, has a good understanding around electric vehicles and what's happening with them at the moment. Also, we'll have to present a bit of a case study, Robin Mellon, who is the CEO of a business called Better Sydney. He's a sustainability educator working with businesses and the building industry to help them develop more sustainable supply chains. But the reason that he's really with us today is that he spent some time without having a car, owning a car, and then bought an EV, and would love to share some insights and what he loves most about having an electric vehicle. So he'll provide us with a bit of case study, including telling us some stories from his journey driving from Sydney to Melbourne in his EV. So I think we're all looking forward to hearing some highlights of a long trip like that and how it turned out for him. So we look forward to hearing from Robin into the program. So welcome everyone, glad that you've joined us. I think most people who've come on board have jumped on and let us know about their level of knowledge, and I'll hand over to Anthony, who will maybe just give a quick understanding of what's come through, share the results of the poll, and get started with our event. So welcome.
Thanks, Michelle. I'll be going through a brief presentation today to talk about electric vehicles themselves and what they're like and why they're different and why they're important, I guess. And then we'll take a few questions about the vehicles themselves. I know they're of a lot of interest to people. So we'll take questions at the end of each section. We'll then talk about charging stations themselves and how to charge the vehicles. As Michelle said, we'll have a chat with Robin, talk to him about his experiences driving down to Melbourne and driving around the eastern suburbs of Sydney in an EV. And we'll finish up with just a brief rundown of sort of each individual council's programs around EVs and any other further questions you've got. So I'll just quickly hand back to Julian because he's looking after the poll. Julian, did you want to give the results of the poll? Great. So we have with us 52% of people saying that they are a beginner, and 43% also saying that they would, they have know a few things, but are keen to find out a lot more. So this is great because the presentation's really pitched at sort of the basics of electric vehicles. Okay. So one second, can't see her. Okay, sorry about that.
That's it.
So why are we interested as council in electric vehicles? Well, the biggest reason is because we've got a mandate from our community and our councillors and mayors to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We're trying to limit global warming to ideally 1.5 degrees and definitely less than 2 degrees. Climate change is extremely topical at the moment, as it should always be, but especially with the Glasgow conference coming up. And when we look at our emissions in the eastern suburbs, the biggest contributor by far is electricity, and that's the things we're using in our homes and our businesses. But second to that is definitely transport, with 20% of the total emissions. Electricity is an interesting one because as we put more solar on our roofs and we develop major solar farms, and the state government works on renewable energy zones to replace our coal-fired power stations, the grid actually becomes progressively greener. So there's a lot happening in that space, and things are getting better quickly. And we're sort of shifting our focus now a bit more into the transport sector and looking at our bus fleets, passive transport like cycling and walking, but also for electric vehicles because they can be charged from renewable sources and using a grid that's greener in the future. Then we also can see the transport and the level of transportation and distance traveled per person. And you can see there's certain parts of the eastern suburbs where the distance traveled, kilometers per person, is a lot higher in the northern and the southern parts of the eastern suburbs, and that really reflects sort of the location being at the sort of the tips, but also sort of access to public transport, I guess, as well, with sort of train stations and light rails sort of not going to those areas as well, so more buses. So we do have quite high car use per person in some areas and lower in others, but it is a significant proportion of our emissions. And then some really interesting recent data has come out about EV ownership, and it really shows up as the eastern suburbs being a hotspot for electric vehicles and electric vehicle ownership, particularly around the northern part of the eastern suburbs. There are quite, and it's anecdotally, I'm sure a lot of people will have really noticed the big sort of uptick in electric vehicles on the roads that they're seeing driving around in the last 6 to 12 months. And then finally, we're really interested because you're interested. We did an electric vehicle survey and we had an unprecedented number of respondents, 1,186. And the community told us that, they're really, really interested in purchasing an EV when they're considering buying their next car. A lot of the community, 86%, wanted council to help facilitate more EV charging. And of that, sort of 79% of people said, well, if you do help with this EV charging problem and providing more EV charging stations, that would really help us influence our decision to purchase an electric vehicle. So from the council perspective, there's not much we can do about the price of an electric vehicle, the models that are available in the Australian market, but we can help and influence the availability of charging. And so that's where we're sort of choosing to focus our efforts on trying to sort of get more electric vehicles on the road. Interestingly enough, I guess this is surprising because of the high density of apartments in the eastern suburbs and dwellings without off-street parking, but 43% of people really don't have somewhere to charge an EV. And so really the focus of what we're trying to do is also, really trying to if we're serious about it, we're trying to help people who might not have somewhere to charge it, be able to charge it and still own an electric vehicle and buy an electric vehicle with confidence that they're going to be able to fill it up. So what are the different types of EVs, or cars, I should say? So this is a bit of a scale of what people talk about when they talk about different vehicle types. So you've got on the left-hand side a conventional vehicle which runs on petrol or diesel, uses an internal combustion engine, and has relatively high emissions using petrol or diesel. Then if you move across, you have a hybrid vehicle, which is a battery and petrol and diesel, which has a combustion engine, but also can have a battery. And this battery really extends the range of the vehicle. It charges when you brake, So it sort of replenishes based on regenerative braking. And a good example of these sorts of cars are sort of the Toyota Priuses or the taxis that are around in Toyota Camrys. They fit into those categories. But when we talk about EVs, we're really talking about the last two categories, which are the plug-in hybrids and the fully electric EVs. So a plug-in hybrid, once again, still fills up at the pump, but also has an even larger battery. And really the idea behind it is that you use the electricity for your sort of day-to-day journeys around the city, whereas it's sort of got it's effectively got petrol for the longer range journeys. So if you're going out of the city or you're driving a lot, and it's seen as a good stepping stone for people to buy an EV. Examples of these are sort of the Mitsubishi Outlander, lots of the Volvo models are plug-in hybrids as well. And they're a good option if you sort of are concerned about running out of charge, but there's not too many reasons to be concerned about that these days. And then finally, all electric. So these are what we commonly just refer to as EVs. They only have an electric plug and a battery and zero tailpipe emissions. So what's been happening in the electric vehicle market? Well, this data is fresh off the press from the EV Council, and it shows an extremely strong uptick in electric vehicle sales over the last 2.5 years. The data for 2021 is only till the end of June. So projecting it out, EVs are expected to be 3% of the light vehicle sales in 2021, which is by far the fastest growing area of the market. It's a really amazing result. Anecdotally, we've heard that Tesla's got, 1,500 cars sitting on docks ready to be delivered for their new Model 3. So expect to see a whole bunch more electric vehicles, and in many segments of the Australian market, EVs are dominating and showing their value. A bit more about the market itself. In 2021, 6,888 vehicles were sold. And this is pretty surprising, but there are actually 31 vehicles, type models, I should say, available in the Australian markets of EVs. And 14 of those models are priced really reasonably. They're under $65,000. The EV Council has an excellent list of up-to-date models available. And by the end of the year, there's expected to be 58 models of EVs for sale on the market. So I think what's been holding it back is really that there's not the types of EVs that people want, especially in the sort of SUV segment, but increasingly that's being addressed as more and more car brands bring their vehicles out. It's also showing that there's a whole bunch of electric vehicle chargers out there, 3,000, and of those 4,700 are fast chargers. We're really still lagging behind other countries, as is well publicized, but the next few years are going to be crucial for Australia to be able to catch up. So what do these EVs look like? I think it's just important to show everyone that they don't look like space cars. They look like the cars that you see every day. And in most cases, you might not even realize they're electric vehicles. They come with a fair amount of range. You have to remember that the average distance traveled in Sydney is about 38 kilometers per day. In parts of many people do a lot less than that in the eastern suburbs. And that the vehicles themselves have battery ranges, starting from around 260 upwards to sort of closer to 500. So based on those sorts of ranges, you're only really needing to charge once a week. It's not something that if you forget about charging for a night that you run out of battery range of. We're seeing really big price deflation as well as these models come onto more models come onto the market. Tesla has cut their prices 3 times in the last 12 months. And we're expecting there to be cost parity with normal, I guess, or internal combustion engines by about 2025. So the market is changing very, very quickly. It's something everyone needs to stay abreast of. If there's one sort of message to take out of this, is that don't make your mind up about EVs. Keep considering them, keep checking what's out there, seeing what models are out there and what's right for you, because the market's evolving really, really quickly, and there's bound to be something that suits your sort of tastes and lifestyle. And what makes EVs different? Really, a whole bunch of things. And Robin's really going to tell us a bit more about what it's like driving an EV. But in terms of components, they're much, much simpler. They are quieter. They have a single sort of gear, so you don't get the gear changing constantly of a normal car where it automatically changes into gear. Probably the biggest things are that people talk about is the sort of the power behind the car, and how it sort of responds. Almost, it feels like an instant response to pushing the pedal down, which is great to drive. The safety aspects are sort of really understated too, because they have a battery pack that sits in the floor of the vehicle. The center of gravity is a lot lower. And so when driving an EV, it feels like it really hugs the road a lot better and is a lot more responsive when steering. And I think Tesla and a lot of the other vehicles get really top marks for safety when they do their testing. We've talked, there's a claim from Tesla, and it's sort of true that, you know, it's a computer on wheels and the car becomes smarter as it drives. So as there are more services and updates and features, they can get added to your car, and it can almost learn a bit about you as well, and how you drive and what your sort of habits are, and it can adjust accordingly to your sort of driving habits as well. I'll talk a bit more in the next slides about the sort of pollution and cost of ownership and maintenance costs. So running costs are approximately half as a comparable normal combustion engine car. So if you break it down, for a petrol diesel vehicle, fuel is about 70% cheaper because it's got regenerative braking, power is getting recycled and returned to the vehicle, and the maintenance costs are a whole bunch less. There's 20 moving parts versus sort of 2,000 on a normal combustion engine car. And I read recently an article of someone who is a taxi driver up in Byron, who has driven 400,000 on a single set of brake pads, which is just completely unheard of. So the data is constantly coming in about EVs and the running costs, because they're still relatively new, and some of the oldest ones going around are coming up to 10 years for some of the Nissan Leafs, but some of them are sort of hitting that time where we're getting some really good information, and it's all coming out extremely positively. The fact that they just have less things to maintain, there's not oil changes, transmission changes, fuel filters, timing belts, air filters. Really, when you take an EV into a service, they do a test on the batteries, they check the motor and the inverter, and away you go. In terms of payback, I'll be honest here, the paybacks are going to improve, but at the moment they're not at it's not at the same level. So these are the running costs and paybacks over a 5-year period, and I'm comparing a Nissan Leaf to a Nissan Pulsar. So a similar style of vehicle, similar size. The Nissan Leaf costs on the road about 62,000 compared to the Nissan Pulsar, which is around 23,000. However, the big savings are in the monthly running costs. So $130 for the Nissan Leaf compared to $235. When you plug all those things together, the running costs, the upfront costs, the depreciation, the maintenance, you get a 5-year cost of ownership of the Leaf of $51,000 and a 5 years cost of ownership of the Pulsar of $30,000. So that's the first thing to note, is that's going to improve over time. The second thing is there's a whole bunch of other values that you get by obviously having the Leaf, the emissions, the air pollution, the experience, all of those things, and which we'll talk about in a bit. And the third thing to sort of notice is that depreciation on those vehicles, I think, is going to improve a lot, because I think the resale value of the EVs is really going to start improving over, say, if you sold after 5 years compared to a petrol combustion engine, because of this transition that's happening in our economy. People aren't going to be as keen to buy those sorts of older vehicles in 5 years' time. And looking a bit more in detail at emissions. So this is what they used to call it's a life cycle assessment of CO2 equivalent for the production, the transportation, the energy imports, where the batteries have come from, where they're made, when it's shipped to Australia, how they're used, how they're driven. So it's everything factored in to a life cycle assessment, and it's comparing a Hyundai Kona in terms of its carbon outputs, direct and indirectly, for different states, and it's comparing it to a Toyota Corolla, which is a similar sort of size car. So for an EV, this is called a wheel to well emission comparison, and you can see here in New South Wales ACT, because of the different fuel mixes in the grid, means that the emissions of using an electric vehicle just plugged into the grid are different. But in New South Wales and the ACT, it's 125 tons, 1.25 tons of CO2 per 10,000 kilometers. So that's for an EV. And if you compare it to a brand new current Toyota Corolla, it's 1.9 tons per 100 Ks, 10,000 Ks. So if you drove 20,000 Ks, you would double this difference. And so it's a roughly 50% improvement by having an EV, and that's factoring in everything that's involved. If you own an older model EV, so typically like a 10-year-old Toyota Corolla, the impact is a lot worse. So 2.54 tons per 10,000 Ks. So you can see how switching out a 10-year-old Toyota Corolla and buying an EV equivalent reduces the emissions by roughly half. So it's a really amazing result. And all of this data comes, there's some links at the bottom to show you where it all comes from. And it's sort of there's a whole bunch of calculations behind it from the National Greenhouse Accounts that you can read online if you're interested. Batteries, we always get a lot of questions about what about the batteries and what are they made of? So they are lithium ion batteries, which are the most common types of batteries. When you actually pull out an EV, they have these battery packs at the bottom, like you can see in these photos, and these sort of square packs are just they look like AA batteries, and essentially that's what it's made up of. They're extremely resistant to any accidents or crashes or fires. They're very, very, very safe. The degradation on them is really, really low. After 26,000 kilometers, the degradation has been measured at only 8 to 10%. And that's excellent because they take to about 70%. They're still highly usable. So we've still got most Teslas are still operating at about 90% battery capacity even after 5-6 years of driving. The warranties on them are typically sort of 8 to 10 years or 160,000 kilometers on the battery packs. But for a Tesla, that goes up to about 240,000 kilometers. And interestingly, the world is moving on, and our car companies are all moving towards EVs. So we've got Ford phasing out internal combustion engines in Europe by 2030, Honda agreeing to sell only EVs by the end of 22 in Europe, Toyota, the biggest car company in the world, 15 new EV models by 2025, and Volvo committing to be all electric by 2030. So the biggest players, not just the Teslas of this world, are moving towards EVs. And before we just have a little break for some questions to answer questions about the cars themselves, just to show you what's happening at a state government level. New South Wales has really experienced the biggest change over the last 12 months of any state, and is now a hugely supportive state for electric vehicles. So you should feel confident, like, to buy an EV because it has the backing, the whole of government backing from councils, from New South Wales government. With their new electric vehicle strategy, there's $500 million in funding for actions. So most notably, $3,000 for the first 25,000 EVs sold under $70,000 in New South Wales. Removal of stamp duty for EVs under $78,000. There's been a lot of talk about road user charges for electric vehicles. So this is charging, instead of a fuel tax, charging EV users to use the road on a kilometre basis. That's been agreed to be deferred to 2027 and really pushed back down the road until EVs are a significant part of the market. There's a whole bunch of other initiatives being done by the state government. So hats off to them. They've really gotten on board with the sort of evolution of EVs and realized the benefits to it, and are extremely supportive now. So before we jump into charge stations, I was just going to we'll run through the chat and see what questions there were. And
Anthony, we can feed some of those questions through to you. So one that was relevant to this section was around the range and how accurate is like what they're putting out compared to the real world range of the vehicles.
Yep. I can include some data in the presentation notes. I can include another slide, but the real world driving range it's a bit like every car. There's the sticker range, and then there's the real world range. And there is about a 10% variance from what I remember. So that's just depends on how you drive it as well, and if you're driving it in the city versus in the country. And then there is the degradation of the batteries year on year on year. That's that slide where it's still after, it's only a sort of 8 to 10% degradation after 26,000 kilometers. So there's a couple of things to factor in there, but there is some really good data which I can include on that for people that are interested.
There was also a question about insurance. Do you know if there's any differences in insurance rates for EVs, or is it just based on the value of the car?
I think there's differences in insurance rates for all types of cars, depending on what the sort of type of car you put in. I think there's a whole bunch of back-end algorithms that work out your insurance premiums based on where you live and the type of vehicle you own and your age and how many kilometers you're going to drive. So I would say yes, but I don't know definitively.
Yeah, whether it would be higher or lower, you've got no sense. If anybody online has any sense about that, perhaps just type it into the chat. There's a few questions about batteries, but let's leave you perhaps to answer those just anyway naturally in the battery section. One was about running out of charge, and the other one was around replacing batteries and if that's necessary and when. So perhaps you just can include that in there. Rachel, was there any other questions that we haven't covered off on?
Sophie had a question about why are taxes and stamp duty so much higher for electric vehicles, Anthony?
Yeah, just going back to the stamp duty. So EVs are considered a luxury vehicle. A lot of them are considered luxury vehicles because of, I can't remember what the cutoff is, but it is around the $75,000-$80,000. But increasingly, more vehicles are coming in under that, so they're not subject to the luxury vehicle tax. The stamp duty in New South Wales there's going to be zero stamp duty for EVs under $78,000.
Thank you. There's a policy question around the justification for the road user charge. If you buy an EV, will it be used to help subsidise charging station infrastructure?
Yeah. That's a big criticism of, I think, this policy, and it's a big criticism of the fuel excise tax, that it doesn't directly go the 40 cents you pay per litre of fuel doesn't necessarily go to maintaining roads or providing road infrastructure. It goes to consolidated revenue. And I guess the trend will be towards a road user tax. It's good news that it's been deferred for a period of time in New South Wales, but I guess it's a state government question for the state government. I'm not 100% sure if there's any guarantees on how it's going to get used.
Great. We do have a lot of battery questions, but we'll hold those until after the battery section.
Yeah, great.
Thanks, Anthony.
Julian, did you want to do our second poll? Here we go. This poll's about charging. We're interested to find out from the audience, with public EVs becoming more prominent, have you used an EV charger? Have you seen them in the public but never used one, or have you never seen one? This is great. I can see some live real-time polling, which I'll just put up on the screen. Hopefully you can see as well. And I'll give everyone another 10 seconds to answer. Okay, great. So we've got 6% of people having used an EV charger, which is to be expected, I guess, with people's earlier responses. 78% have seen EV charging in public but never used one, which is great. It's good that they're becoming more visible and that people are aware of them. And 16% haven't seen a public EV charger. Great. Well, the next section's all about the chargers themselves. So a quick intro on what the different charging types are. There's level 1, 2, and a couple of types of level 3 chargers. Really quickly, without getting too technical, level 1 chargers are the stuff you typically put in your home. And it's a photo of a whole bunch of different ones here. And they would go in your home or workplace and go up on the wall. And these are great for sort of charging your car overnight. You can just charge your car off a normal power point. It will take about 3 times longer, but it will still work perfectly well. And for a lot of people, that's fine because they will use their EV during the day. At the end of the day, they will park in a carport and garage, and they will plug it in every sort of second day and charge it for 12 hours. And they will have more than enough of range just on a normal power point to use their vehicle. But for most people, if they're buying an EV, they'll get a special unit that looks like this and can deliver sort of a little bit more power quicker, and they're not an expensive unit. They're coming down to around $500 for the unit themselves and $1,000 for installation. So not an expensive piece of equipment for someone who's going to own an EV and be able to charge a bit quicker in their home. A level 2 charger is sort of more suited to destinations and public areas. These are, I'll show you some more examples later, but this is one at Coogee. It's our public EV charging station. It can deliver up to 22 kilowatts of power per hour as opposed to 7. So it's a fair bit faster, and that just depends on the type of car. Then we start getting into what's called level 3 or fast charging. And this is an example of a 50 kilowatt DC charger. So without getting into the technicalities, DC is direct current, which means it can be a bit quicker. The previous chargers were AC, so they an alternating current, and it just means it's a bit of a slower process for the car to charge. And I guess in the last couple of years, this is a photo from Robin from the Barnawathara tuck shop in Victoria of an ultra fast charger. And these are some amazing pieces of equipment that a lot of them are designed and built in Queensland by a company called Tritium, and they can charge up to 350 kilowatts of power per hour for your car. So that I'll give you a bit more. That's sort of what they look like. Here's a bit of a table of sort of, okay, how long is it going to take me, which is what people want to know. So a level 1 charger, overnight, residential application Level 2s, which is our sort of council ones, you're sort of plugging in for a couple hours and you're getting about 150 kilometers of range, and they're sort of more suited to car parks and some sort of more residential areas. And then you start getting to your fast chargers, which are sort of shopping centers and ultra fast on highways as well. And they're really quick. So with traveling interstate, and Robin will talk about this, you really can rock up, have a walk around, get a coffee, do some shopping, have a amenities break, and you're back on the road driving again. In the eastern suburbs, really proud to be the first councils to have installed an electric vehicle charging network, first of any councils in New South Wales to be able to support our residents and visitors. We've had our charging stations sort of network operating for the last 2.5 years, and there's currently 8 charging stations pretty well spread across the eastern suburbs, and there are more to come, with one in Paddington hopefully being installed before the end of the year. They will, for a Tesla 3, which is a common EV on the market, cost you about $6 for 2 hours of charging during peak times. So that's 2 till 8 p.m. And if you are lucky enough to just charge it after sort of 10 p.m. at night, before 6 a.m. the next morning, you'll pay about $2 for that 150 kilometers of range. So they're subsidized by council. We've installed them, we maintain them with an agreement with a company called ChargeFox, and we subsidize the electricity on them as well. They require you to bring your own EV charging cable. So pretty much all EV owners carry a cable in their car that allows them to use public charging stations and is the right plug type for their vehicle. And we use a Mennon's plug type, which is extremely common at the other end. Just for your information, the usage of these charge stations have just grown exponentially. So when we started, we had about 40 uses a month. After a year, we had about 160 uses a month. And just before COVID, we were getting around 300 uses a month. So in that sort of 2 years' time, it really took off, and we're seeing lots and lots of vehicles use them. Our busiest stations are getting to 2 to 3 uses a day. So hence the need to sort of expand them. This is sort of some of the work I'm engaged in, which is sort of shows you what the challenge is for council. We've got a photo of the top of our Bondi Beach electric vehicle charging station, and a car using it and another car really needing a charge and doing a bit of an illegal park and stretching their cable across to be able to use it. So we've really tried to remedy this, and we've taken that second spot. This is quite early on. We've taken that second spot next to the charger, so now 2 cars can use it at once. But as the demand grows, we're going to need to put in more and more charging. We've got people like the person in the bottom left who is needing to charge their car, has done a good job at connecting a power cord across the tree. But we really want to be able to offer charging stations more locally, so that they're not doing something dangerous like this or putting cables across footpaths. Example here is a house in Paddington, and even though they've put a pedestrian barrier underneath, it's still not ideal. So we want to make charging more ubiquitous, more accessible, allow people to be able to put charging stations in areas where people can walk within 5 minutes of their homes and be able to charge if they don't have off-street parking themselves. How do you find a charging station? So the best source of information, open source information, is a website called PlugShare, and that has every single charge station pretty much around the world on it. So it's great when you go traveling and if you want to rent an electric vehicle overseas. But it's not just got locations. When you click on one of those little dots, it shows you photos of it, tips on how to get there. There's comments from people that have used it recently, and they tell you, what the experience was like Was something broken? Was it hard to find? So it's a really, really great source of information. And you can just get that on your phone as an app. A lot of cars themselves will have maps inbuilt on their screens, on their touch screens, that will navigate you to electric vehicle chargers, and will even plan out trips for you to tell you when you need to stop and charge for longer journeys. So you don't need to worry as much as you think about running out of charge. That was a bigger problem a few years ago, but as more and more charge stations become available and the software becomes more sophisticated, it's less and less of a problem. Some people will come in and charge their car every night because they don't want to forget and they'll want to keep it 90% full, but really the optimum charging level is from about 10% of when your battery is about 10% full, 90% empty, to about 65%, because that's when you're using charging on highways, that's when you can charge a lot quicker. So the graph sort of shows you the number of minutes to get to the next 5%. And you can see that when you're between 10% and 35%, it's only taking you a minute to gain 5% extra battery capacity. But if you sort of went to one of these charging stations and you're at about 80%, it takes you 4 minutes. So really, that last good example is that last 5% to get from 95% to 100% takes you as long as it takes you to get from sort of 5% to 40%. So it's really good to sort of wait till your vehicle's at a sort of more of an emptier level to be able to sort of charge a bit quicker. So what's happening next around electric vehicle charging? So in the eastern suburbs, lots of things are happening. There's plans to put some electric vehicle charging points on street poles where they're doing streetscape upgrades around the eastern suburbs. We're looking at that for some of the smart poles that are going in, and some work with Arena, hopefully, in this space as well, where we'll be able to retrofit them not just to the newer poles, but to some of the existing wooden poles. On the right, you'll see a substation, which is like an Ausgrid electricity box, and that there's sort of these green boxes that are getting cladded to be with an outside skin, and that includes an electric vehicle charging station. So this is happening in Randwick. There's a couple of spots on Anzac Parade in Kensington and Maroubra, which Ausgrid is working has got approval with another company and from council to install these for people to use. I believe the first 7 kilowatts is free, and then you pay after that. There's a lot more charging going in shopping centres. You can see in the photo on the bottom, charging points being available for people that are just rocking up to underground shopping car parks. And then also the federal government has announced funding for fast charging to sort of go in, and there's potentially 5 spots around the eastern suburbs where faster DC charging will get installed in the next 2 years. I've included a whole bunch of resources to learn more and to read, and a lot of these are links to some of the information that we've gone through today. So if you click, when we send this out, if you can click on these and it will take you to the various websites, and you can find out more or email council or myself if you've got any questions. I'll include my contact details on the presentation as well. But it's not over. We're going to now hear from our case study, which is Robin Mellon. Robin is a strong EV advocate. He has produced and owned an EV for, I think it's around, I want to say a year, but he'll correct me when he jumps on. But he produced an excellent series of articles for an online publication called The Fifth Estate, where he documented his sort of travels driving down to Melbourne and back with an EV. This is a photo of Robin and myself down at Bondi Beach, plugging in his MG vehicle, and you can see there's another vehicle next door also plugged in. And so he's got some great real life lessons of what it's like using an EV. So
Anthony,
Robin,
just Before we head to Robin, perhaps we've still got quite a lot of questions came through around the charging, and it would be good to put maybe a couple of them to you, especially ones that are very related to sustainability.
Sure. Yep.
So one, I think, is probably a common question for a lot of people who are really interested in reducing their carbon emissions. Can the charging link with solar output, and what are the kind of implications there for people? If they've got solar panels, how do they make the best use of those, and what sort of size array would they need to be able to charge and link their charging with their home and their car?
Okay, so the first part of that is easy. Yes, if you plug in your car during the day when the sun's shining and your solar panels are operational or generating any electricity, whatever electricity your house and your car is using, it will take from the solar panels first. So if you're at home and you know, typically that's Sydney anytime between 7 a.m. and 5 p.m. in winter, or 6 a.m. and 8 p.m. in summer, you'll get to use your panels, which is great. And so that charging can be free for you. Sizing your solar for an electric vehicle, really, it depends. And that's sort of something you can't answer as a general rule. And you need to look at individually. You need to look at what your house is using, but also, you know, putting on excess panels for your car. The rule of thumb, if I had to give you one, is just to solar has become so cheap and easy and mainstream that it's best to actually just cover your roof with as much solar as you can, as you have as roof space that allows. So if you've got any north, east, or west facing roof, just cover it, and you can get credit. You can get whatever you don't use, you can export to the grid. You'll get good money for. If you own an EV, and this is coming down the track, if you buy an EV, I should say, or own an EV, and it's a really, really hot afternoon in summer, and the wholesale price of electricity is going through the roof, it's gone up, you know, 100 times what it normally is. There's going to be ways in the very near future for you to actually discharge power from your car and sell it back to the grid and make good money for doing that, because that power is going to be in huge demand. So the battery in your EV is really going to operate two ways. It's not just going to be you taking power from your solar and from the grid, but it's also it's going to facilitate you being able to sell that power to the grid during peak times, and then charge when it's, you know, at 1 or 2 a.m. when all that demand and everyone's air conditioners have sort of switched off and the demand's really dropped. So that tech is not very far away at all, and it's become permissive. It's there actually already, but it's going to become mainstream very soon in the next year, and it's all become a lot permissible as well under the sort of energy rules that are set by the government.
Great. Thanks, Anthony. I think we might leave the questions there just so we make sure Robin's got enough time to present. And if there's other questions that we haven't gotten to, we'll try to answer. Some of them have been answered in the chat, and otherwise we'll try to point you to some links that will help to answer them for you. Okay, so let's pass over to Robin.
Okay, Robin. So thanks for your time. We just wanted to find out what EV you had and why did you buy it?
You put a photo of it up earlier. So it's the MG ZS EV. I went and test drove quite a few. So I test drove the Jaguar and the Tesla, which were beautiful, but I can't afford them. And I test drove things like the Kona, which was, yeah, I didn't choose that one. So the MG was affordable and had the right range. And I only bought it about 6 months ago, Anthony. It was just earlier this year, but it really has been a bit of a life changer. I've been making do with GoGet and public transport, but needed something to get up to, you know, Dad on the Central Coast or friends in Katoomba or down south. So needed something that would span that gap.
Great. So when you drive around, where do you usually charge it, or how do you charge it?
So big news, drum roll. It's been down at Bondi, just by the pavilion, in the charging spot that you showed for the last 6 months, which is great. And I saw the question pop up in the box earlier. A full charge down on that station at the weekend cost me $3.67. So
wow,
that's a full charge. So that's 270 kilometers of range. Now I've actually just had one fitted in the basement car park of our building, and had to get a strata bylaw and had to get, of course, that fitted privately. But now I can just plug it in and charge overnight if I need to. But I've still got the option, so I can still use any of those, plug share or ChargeFox stations, or just plug it in downstairs.
Mm. And Robin, to everyone listening, Robin provided the strata bylaw to council very generously. He worked tirelessly in developing it, and I'll put that in the presentation because I think he's offered us to be able to use it with to provide it for people to use with some disclaimers. But I think it's great work that you've done there, Robin. How far do you usually drive it? So where do you usually go, and what's the furthest you've taken it?
You had it right earlier. Most trips are really short. They're like 30 kilometers or less. But even with the cheapest, one of the shortest ranges on the market, I can get up to see Dad on the Central Coast. He's up at Erina, so I can get up there and back on one charge and not even worry about it. Or I can get up to see friends in Katoomba, so Blue Mountains and back on the same charge. If I go down to the south coast, down to Sanctuary Point, for example, there's a fast charge at Shell Cove, so I'll just stop there for 15 minutes and grab a coffee, and it'll top up halfway. So the furthest I've taken it is down to Melbourne. So I went down inland via Albury-Wodonga and then back around the coast. So that was about 2,500 kilometers, and that 2,500 kilometers cost me $95. So it was $37 to Melbourne and then $95 in total all the way around. So it works out less than 4 cents per kilometre.
Wow, that's amazing. It's getting to Melbourne for $37 is the quickest, cheapest way you could probably get there. Yeah, so range anxiety, we've talked a bit about that. Do you get it, and do you worry about it more than?
The answer is no. I mean, I saw again in the chat box, range anxiety is something that people talk up, and it's no more than range anxiety that you get with a petrol car. It's like, roughly how far you've got to go, and you look at how far, your map is telling you, because the machine is very smart. It says your range now is 200 kilometers, and you can use an app or you can use the in-car computer to say, and there's a charger 120 kilometers away. So very rarely have I got range anxiety. I did just around the southeast corner of Australia, just between that Victoria New South Wales border, because there weren't many chargers around there. But then you get up to Cooma and you can plug it into the back of the Snowy Hydro power system and charge it up again. So it's all fairly simple. Range anxiety, not as much, because the car's computer controls it all.
Mm-hmm. Great. And this is a complicated question. It sounds like a simple one, but how long does it usually take to charge up?
Depends where you go. So down at the Pavilion, down at Bondi, it's a fairly slow charge. So it'll take you maybe 4 or 5 hours. If I do one downstairs from empty to full, maybe that's an overnight, 6.5 hours. But the fast charge, if you drive to Melbourne, you'll stop at Goulburn, Gundagai, Albury-Wodonga. They'll take you 45, 50 minutes, which is time to, use the bathroom, grab a cup of tea, look at the dog on the tucker box, whatever it is. And actually, it's a really good break. So depends on the speed of the charger.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And what other differences have you noticed in terms of costs? Have you been having to pay out for EVs versus not having?
Biggest 3 differences, and I guess sort of lumping those 2 questions in, certainly cost. It's substantially cheaper. A full charge for $3.67 is, blows my head. But that's great. Get up to see Dad, get up to Blue Mountains and back for a couple of dollars. It's cheaper than the train. Curiously, driving to Melbourne, like driving thousands of kilometers, the biggest difference is the lack of noise and the lack of vibration. Petrol engines, diesel engines have a permanent vibration. So I got to Melbourne and there was almost no stress. It was quiet, it was vibration free. And so there's no stress on the body. And it's a massive difference that I hadn't taken into account. And the other difference, and I guess this answers a question that I saw in the chat box. It depends what speed you drive. So a bit like a petrol car, an EV, you know, if you're flat out doing 120, obviously not that that's legal, but if you were, it's chewing up the power faster as it would be chewing up the petrol. And so for my car, there's a sweet spot about 105 kilometers an hour where it's using 20% of the power drawdown. If I go up to 115, it's using 40%. So there's a sweet spot where you're getting maximum kilometers and that full range out of it.
Great. And I guess having driven an EV, would you ever go back to driving a normal internal combustion engine?
Never go back. I genuinely would never go back for, you know, so many reasons, not least of which are all the environmental reasons. I can use renewable energy, solar power to charge my car up and go, you know, carbon neutral to Melbourne. But also the sheer satisfaction, because just being a rev head just for a moment, if you put the pedal down, you can draw 100% of power straight away, no gear change. So if you want to flat foot it, you can. There's all that power and it's right there. Now, most of the time you drive very, you know, sedately and very moderately, but it's great to know that you've got acceleration if you need it. You're not compromising.
So fun, I guess that's what some people, you know, miss in the whole discussion about EVs. There's such a better experience of being behind the wheel. That's really interesting. Thanks so much, Robin. We'll get you to stick around because we're almost finished with the presentation. I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions, but just on the one last slide really, and I won't go into this too much, but all of the councils today, Waverley, Woollahra and Randwick, are trying very hard to support the transition to EVs, and that means increasing the numbers of EV charging stations. We've talked about that. Randwick has rebates just recently announced for people who want to put in an EV charger in their home, up to $500 per charger or up to $2,000 for apartments. So there's a link on this presentation to find out more about that, and it's a really simple process to get that rebate. Waverley and Woollahra are looking at also, you know, very much putting in conditions, so making sure that all new apartment blocks have power or ability to add EV charging stations at a later date. And we're really trying to, you know, educate and promote charging to a wide audience. Great. Well, we'll open it up again to questions. We're right on time, so I understand if people definitely have to go, but we're happy to stick around for another little while to answer any questions you have.
Thanks, Anthony. So we do have quite a lot of questions coming through. A lot of them have been answered in the chat, but probably a good kind of question to support a few people. People were interested in like battery health and how to keep an EV's battery healthy. Like, is it good to run it down in the charge, or is it not good to do that? Is it not good to charge it when it's nearly full? That sort of thing.
I think I'll let Robin jump in here just really quickly. It's not good to completely run it down to that like less than bottom 5%. And it's slow, as you saw in that graph, when you sort of get up over sort of 90%. Robin, do you know a bit more?
There's an inbuilt computer, of course, in the car, which is controlling the charging. So it slows the charging down for those final percentages. So you can't overcharge it. It will literally, once it's full, it will stop the charge process. And it's not sort of a stressful process in that it will charge up to sort of 80% and then it will slow that down. But you know, I know you'll read articles which say, well, once the battery's full and if you use regenerative braking, it could overcharge. And the answer is no, the computer controls all of that. So it's not going to let the car overcharge itself.
Yeah. There was a few questions came through in relation to charging in apartments, and I noted down for people that we've got a whole webinar up online from that we did with some councils previously together as a joint project that really talks about that in detail. So it's better to hear the detail around that. There basically are options, but it really depends whether you want to do something for an individual or you want to do something for the whole apartment block or something in between. And all of those options are discussed in that presentation. So I'll share the links through to that for everyone. That's probably the best way to respond to that. Rachel, do you want to bring up any other questions?
Oh, look, most of them have been answered, but there was one, does the battery need to be replaced after 10 years? I think someone replied it lasts for the lifetime of the car. Is that, Robin and Anthony, is that something that you can comment on?
It depends how you drive it. It's a bit like your battery in your mobile phone or in a shaver or in any device. It depends how you use it. The battery will probably last much longer. It depends on whether you've sort of drained it down and recharged it steadily. But you know, I would imagine that mine will last significantly longer than the guarantee period. And then you can look at either replacing it or, as Anthony was saying, get a new car.
Great, thank you. And just the simple question of, if you did run out of charge and you weren't near a charger, like, does the NRMA come and help you out? Have you ever had that happen, Robin?
So before I drove to Melbourne and back around the coast, I made sure that I had NRMA cover. It's exactly the same process as if you had run out of petrol. You would call the NRMA, they would note on your account that you have an EV, and they would tow you to the nearest charger. They don't carry little generators with them to charge then and there. That would be very slow, but they will give you a tow to the next charger. But I'll be genuine. I mean, even if I were doing that journey regularly, it would be very rare that you would run out. I mean, your computer says how far you've got to go, and you can look on the map. You can look, I use an app called ABRP, which is a Better Route Planner, and it's a free app. It literally plans you from Melbourne to Sydney via the charging places. So it will sort of factor those in along with your stops. So there's lots of technology to keep you from running out.
I'd also like to thank Ben Newman and Barry from the local council, that Blacktown, that have answered a lot of the questions from their own experience in the chat. So thank you. They've
been on fire. They have been just like tapping them out.
We'll have to employ them, I think, to run a session in combination with you guys. If you're putting a session on, invite us over and we'll answer the questions in the background for you. It was lovely to have those. The other question I thought that might be worth answering is around sustainability of batteries. So are there any battery types that might be more sustainable, or, you know, at end of life, what are the uses for batteries so that they're not just left to be pollutants in our world? Any thoughts on that from either?
Yeah, there's a lot of companies involved in battery recycling. They're definitely got a useful end of life application, so they can get taken out of EVs and be used in the real world applications. And I think they can be, there's people very much looking at the refurbishment of them to be given a second life in vehicles as well. So I think they're not an item that's going to end up in landfill in significant quantities, I would say. But the technology is evolving there, so watch the space. It's a evolving area.
If there's a question here around will the electricity network be able to cope with increased demand through EVs? There's a lot of discussion about that topic on the Driven website, sort of looking at projections and how that might affect our whole energy market going forward. So if you like all that tech talk around this, then go to the Driven's website and you'll find loads of articles on that topic. And otherwise, happy for you guys to put a comment forward as well.
Yeah, just similar to my comment previously, like the EVs are batteries on wheels to some extent, so they help with these problems that the grid is encountering with more things connected to them. Obviously, they take a lot of power from the grid, but they add a lot of flexibility to the grid as well, because they can charge and discharge. And that vehicle, it's called vehicle to grid, is very much a new frontier that's going to be emerging in the next year or so.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Anthony and Robin, to share your expertise with everyone. Everyone who's online, feel free to unmute yourself and say thanks to our presenters for their great expertise. And thank you for all your great questions to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Really good. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very
Fantastic.
much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
That's very
Really
helpful.
interesting.
Thank you. Thank you and bye-bye.
Bye-bye. The next step's action.
Bye.
Set yourself a goal to do something, whether it's to research the best vehicle for you or figure out what the questions are that you want to have answered about the EV. When would be the right time for you to buy an EV? Work out what you need to know to help move forward. Where's your nearest charger? Do some homework after this session, be great, and follow up, and we hope to see you driving in an electric vehicle.